I'm hearing the topic of the Convention of States picking up steam in social or media circles again. A lot of stuff on X. People are mad because the SAVE Act isn't being passed, and this is causing a surge of interest in the Convention of States as a solution to the problem. Now, one thing about the Convention of States is it shares some similarities with the idea of term limits, in that it's a bad idea. So we're going to delve into why it's not the greatest idea in the world. And by the way, if you don't like me saying this about term limits, please look at my previous video when I talk about term limits. A couple of them. So why is this a bad idea? Well, it's kind of a fantasy land solution. Um, it doesn't have grounding in reality, and it really pretty much ignores history and ignores what's actually happening around us at the given moment in time. So what is this beastie? Well, it's part of Article 5 of the Constitution. Article 5 lays out the amendment process to the Constitution. Typical amendment essentially gets approved by three-quarters of the legislatures and is initiated by Congress. What the Convention of States does, it convenes when two-thirds of the states requests it. Then this convention gets together, comes up with rules to decide how they're going to run the convention. They draft amendments, and then any amendments they come up with go to the state houses, and the state houses have to, three-quarters of them have to approve it in order to get these suggested amendments through. Well, what's the problem with this then? Why is there an issue? Well, first we have to get into the history of the U.S. Constitution. Now, this is where the Convention of States people are going to probably lose their minds, but instead of just saying it didn't happen, refute me. Find find me a citation that talks about why what I'm saying is incorrect. Okay, so the problem with uh, Convention of States goes back to the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation were the original Constitution for the United States of America. Now, first thing that happens is whenever you bring up the Articles of Confederation, everyone's like, oh, well, that means you're against the Constitution, or you think the Articles of Confederation are a better document. No, I don't at all. I believe the Constitution is a pretty decent document and probably is superior to the Articles of Confederation. We never really got to see it go to its fruition, but it seems to work. So I don't have any particular longings for the Articles of Confederation. And I really see insufficient evidence to prove that the Articles of Confederation were superior. This is kind of messing me up because I abbreviated Articles of Confederation AOC votes, and so uh, smack myself in the face if I say Cortez instead of that. So just hopefully I don't have a slip up. Okay, so let's talk about the Articles of Confederation. How did we go from the Articles of Confederation to our current Constitution? Well, one of the things we need to do is look at the Articles of Confederation and look at how it needed to be amended. Article 13 of the Articles of Confederation, every state shall abide by the determinations of the United States in Congress assembled on all questions by which this Confederation are submitted to them. And the articles of this Confederation shall be inviolably observed by every state, and the Union shall be perpetual, nor shall any alteration at any time hereafter be made to any of them, unless such alteration be agreed to in a Congress of the United States, and afterwards confirmed by the legislatures of every state. So, first problem is perpetual. That means continuing forever. Are we operating under the auspices of the Articles of Confederation? except for maybe one questionable Supreme Court precedent citation, which I believe has to do with Civil War debts. I think pretty much all the people of the United States, except for maybe some sovereign citizens, agree that the Articles of Confederation are pretty much null and void and was replaced by the US Constitution. Remember, perpetual means it went on forever. So, how did it stop functioning and turn into a new form of government? Also, remember in that same article I talked about, all changes to the Articles of Confederation must be approved by Congress and approved by every state legislature. So, to end the perpetual nature of the Articles of Confederation, to replace it with a new constitution, legally required Congress to agree to it, and then required every state legislature to agree to it as well. This isn't what happened. And people really need to look up what happened in Philadelphia because it's not the parting of the clouds and the rays of sunlight of God coming down and shining on things like people seem to believe. Um, it was a lot of skullduggery and just wasn't. I mean, the results again good, but the idea that this was this thing that was wanted by everyone and it was just the way things had to happen, it wasn't. So once the people in Philadelphia, the delegates, and by the way, and I can't remember if I noted this later in the video, but um, some of the people who showed up as delegates immediately left saying, exceeded your powers, we're not going to do this. A lot of people came and went during the process of it. And so the thing is, it wasn't like there were a lot of people who sat from the beginning to the end of the drafting of the Constitution that actually knew what was going to be completely in it until the final result was produced. Once this final document was produced, it was transmitted to Congress. Congress decided that they didn't want to make a decision on it. So they transmitted it to the states saying, do what you will with this, baby. So once already we violated the Articles of Confederation, Congress didn't approve this. Now, the state legislatures didn't approve the Constitution either. They delegated the decision to the state conventions. Now, a really good book, somewhere up on my shelf behind me, Ratification by Pauline Meyer. Very good book. Goes over, if you want to understand the Constitution in a way most people don't, follow that. It talks about the state conventions. And essentially, what the state conventions were like mini constitutional conventions in each state to decide what the outcome was, with the exception of Rhode Island, which had a plebiscite and voted it down. So, why did the state legislatures not make the decision, and why did they decide to do this? Well, this was a recommendation that came down from the Constitutional Convention. The idea was they wanted to bypass the Article of Confederation's requirement for unanimous consent of the legislatures, because the Constitution was considered actionable if three-quarters of the states approved it, whereas to end the Articles of Confederation and change over to a new government required every single legislature. And they'd already made up their minds that there was no way all the legislatures were going to do this. So this was a deliberate bypass. If you read Madison's notes, he will say, the reason we're doing this is to get by the state legislature requirement of the Articles of Confederation. So the bottom line is that the Philadelphia Convention was put together under false pretenses. The convention exceeded its authority because what had happened was the states were told that they were there to amend the Articles of Confederation. Their state legislatures, uh, uh, essentially, that's what each state legislature send delegates there for that explicit purpose. Now, there was some behind the scenes things where what would become the Federalists had already met several times before this to try to basically put this together. And each time it failed because George Washington didn't want to get behind it. And on this last one, and this is a whole nother story, but how Washington decided that he was going to get behind the new government. Without Washington, there would have been no new constitution. And essentially, his gravitas was enough to basically make the thing move forward. So essentially, you have the convention exceeding its authority, the delegates exceeding their authority. They violated their own constitution. They used legal chicanery to end around the document safeguards. Now, one of the arguments people will throw up at the wall, we don't. They had some meetings beforehand, so that makes it legal. Like, well, no, there were meetings in secret away from the public. They were literally conspiring. And the other thing, well, this was popular. People hated the Articles of Confederation and they wanted a new constitution. That's highly questionable. If uh, you're interested, I can give you a book list to understand this period a lot better. But in fact, the Articles of Confederation were highly popular. You're talking about the government that had defeated Great Britain on the battlefield and was in the process of putting everything together. They were starting to pay off the debts. They were starting to get the money system together. So the question of them being popular or unpopular is very uh, questionable. However, as an argument, this is horrible. So that basically, by the same logic, if you can say, well, the Articles of Confederation were unpopular, so it was okay to overthrow them and put a new constitution in place because it was popular. Well, gee, how popular do you think the current Constitution is amongst our incredibly uneducated population? How many people in our population would happily either get rid of it or modify it so significantly it doesn't look like what it does now? You really want to bank on popularity? Bad idea. So, anyways, what happened in Philadelphia is what's uh, termed by a lot of scholars as a runaway convention, because the convention essentially went in a completely different direction than what was supposed to happen. Now, this convention of states people will deny, most of them, I won't say they all, but most of them will deny this even happened. Okay, go back and look, see if I'm wrong. If I'm right, then you have to ask the next question. How do you prevent it from happening again? And the Convention of States people will tell you, oh, well, if they acknowledge the first convention was runaway, they'll say, well, it can't happen to us. Um, one of the things a lot of people don't realize about the Constitution, when the Constitution was drafted in Philadelphia, when it eventually went down to the states, a lot of the different states were looking for amendments to this Constitution. They want to say, hey, we want to add amendments to this Constitution. At the very least, we want a Bill of Rights. And pretty much the Federalist standpoint was take it or leave it. They essentially said you either approve it as is or you don't. And at the most generous, they said, well, we'll listen to your concerns and consider them later in terms of adding it, but we're only going to uh, take this document as is. And for the most part, they had no intention of really listening to most of these ideas. And the biggest item is the Bill of Rights. Now, the people who don't understand what happened think that the Bill of Rights was something, again, that was highly popular. Well, probably with the most of the country, but not with the Federalists. The Federalists, and to a certain extent, on a legalistic stance, they were right. They said, we don't need a Bill of Rights because these are preventing the government from doing things that they don't have the power to do in the Constitution itself. So there's no need to really negate what they can't do. So legalistically, they were right, but obviously the Bill of Rights was the right way to go. So why did the Federalists reverse themselves? Why did, once the government formed, they immediately went about adding the Bill of Rights? Well, the problem is that essentially when the bill of, when nobody when the Federalists opposed the Bill of Rights, shortly thereafter, once the Constitution was put together, a lot of people said, "Hey, there's a provision in here called a Convention of States. We should do one immediately. Start amending this new Constitution." Well, guess what? A gentleman named Madison, the guy who drafted most of it, was horrified. He said, "Holy crap." Okay, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, I'm not quoting. But he said, "Holy crap. If these guys get together and start amending the Constitution, they could turn it into something completely different than what I put up here. We can't afford to let this happen." So, in all honesty, the reason the Bill of Rights was added was to prevent a convention of states from happening. So, recap real quick. Why is this in there at all? It was so. Why is the Convention of States in the Constitution in the first place? By the way, we've never had one, unless you count the convention in Philadelphia. And this is again out of Madison's notes. Essentially, their goal was to create a quasi legal framework for the same process that the Philadelphia Convention used to bypass the Articles of Confederation and pass it off to the US Congress. So the fun part is even if you can get the Convention of States people to admit, well, yeah, the first convention of states, the convention in Philadelphia, was a runaway, which will be really hard for you to get them to do. Let's say you can. Well, then their next argument is going to be, well, we'll control the process. We will have complete control of the process. So you got to ask the question, why do you guys think you need a convention of states? Well, the reason is clear because people aren't following the Constitution. So, what happens if things go out of control? Well, it won't because the Constitution will prevent that from happening. You see the loop problem there. On one hand, they're basically trying to amend the Constitution because it's not functioning the way they want to, and then they expect the system to work exactly the way they want it to once they get the process rolling. But let's kick at their foundation a little bit more here. Ask the Convention of States people about the Tea Party. A lot of them were involved with it. You know what happened to the Tea Party? Well, the Tea Party started as an idea to put candidates in office who were um, wanted to reduce taxes and balance the budget. Where did the Tea Party go? Well, it was taken away from the activists, same people who want the Convention of States. It was taken away from them by the Republican establishment for a little while, used to rubber stamp their candidates, and then basically faded away when everyone realized it had become useless. So ask them about what's going on with MAGA right now. Do they think they're in full control of everything that's happening to MAGA? I'm out on X. I don't see that's the case. I think a lot of people think MAGA is being wrested away from masses by the establishment. Again, Convention of States people are like, well, yeah, just because we're getting MAGA ripped away from us doesn't mean we're going to f up and make it and have someone take the Convention of States away from us too. Ask them about how the GOP is in control of all branches of government, still struggles with basic conservative agenda. It's because the people who want small government aren't in control of the process. but they're convinced they'll be fully in control of the convention of state process. Ask them about all the GOP controlled state houses that can't pass conservative agendas. There are states out there that are essentially red in name only. And again, it's because they don't have the manpower or the infrastructure to control their state legislatures. But they're going to control the convention of states. They're going to have absolute complete control of it. So, why hasn't a convention of states ever been convened in the entire 250 years of our country? Well, essentially, because enough people knew what Madison knew. Now, if, and if I heard part of the organizers of the Convention of States clearly state that, yes, we know the history, we know what happened in Philadelphia, we understand what happened with Madison and the Bill of Rights. Um, we understand why people have been very leery of doing this. That would make me feel a lot better than, nope, never happened. That tells you they don't know what the hell they're doing. Okay, so if they can get the idea that, okay, the history is not with them, then they have to enunciate their plan. How do they keep this from running away? And they have to do it in terms of their, once this starts going, uh, I don't know, I've been in caucuses and you can essentially throw the entire rule book away. And this has the potential to happen no matter what rules they come walking in with. Um, you have the ability to uh, completely bypass any rule system with a sufficient majority. If they don't control who ends up on the floor of these conventions or the convention, they will lose control of the rules. Okay, so the thing is so we have to have them understand the history and say they understand this. They're going to tell us how it is they're going to pull this off. What is their plan? Then the most important part, plan B. What happens if it gets away from them? What are they going to do next? I really want to hear that. Anybody who says, well, we got a plan and it's foolproof, and you ask them, what's plan B? And they're just, well, we don't need one because plan A won't fail. Dealing with idiots. So take that in stride. So, comment section. How many of you people are familiar with the Convention of States? Uh, are you involved with the Convention of States and how do you feel about it? Did I change your mind a little bit or at least get you thinking? And like I said, I would be for this if I heard people talking to the three questions I just brought up, or at least more willing to listen to it. But the nope, it never happened crowd, I'm sorry, you're not you're not convincing me at this point. All right. Please smash the like button. If YouTube algorithms brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, check out my other titles, consider subscribing, and if you know somebody else who might find this interesting, share it with them. Thanks for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.